Thanks so much for joining us on Sights on the City today. We talked to City Council candidate Charlie Reece. Delighted to curate your city, Durham. This is my colleague and dear friend, Justin Laidlaw, aka Buddy Rusky, asking lots of important questions about what matters for the future of your city. Follow us on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned for more interviews with City Council candidates and City Council members. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and our website, Clarion Content Media. We curate your city, Durham. Yeah, that's a fascinating segue, really, and welcome to Sights on the City. I'm Aaron Mandel, the editor of the Clarion Content, sitting here with our managing editor, Justin Laidlaw, Runaway Clothes marketing director. You can see smartly slipped in the Runaway Clothes shirt there.
By the way, I have that hat with the stars. That's my favorite hat, but I'm afraid to wear it in public because it makes me look like a doofus.
You could have worn it here.
I should have. That would have been solid. But I wear it around the house all the time when I'm working in the yard and stuff.
I'll have to make a red, blue, and yellow suit to go with it.
Oh my gosh, how about just a tie with the little star motif in the middle?
Ooh, the Runaway tie collection.
You could do that.
Something
You could do that.
been done here.
Give anything away just.
Oh, sorry, I'm breaking news here. Sorry, everybody. Just back up, rewind that part of the tape. We'll just you all business.
City Council candidate Charlie Reece. As you can tell, he's a man of many talents. We were just sitting here discussing the diversity of his background, all of these things he's been through and done, which seem to inform who he is today and why he's running now, from starting a homeless shelter as an undergrad at Harvard to doing the radio show there and then being a financial advisor and ending up as a prosecutor in his hometown in Winston-Salem. So it seems like there's been a long journey to the idea of public service.
Yep.
What was your first entree point as a candidate? This isn't your first candidate.
It is. It's the first time I've run for public office. I'm completely new at this.
What gave you the spur to, having been all these other things, say, I'm going to run for city council in Durham?
Well,
why do you want to do it?
Over the last couple of years, I've become more involved in the political life of Durham. I spent a good amount of time and energy last summer working on the police reforms alongside the Fade Coalition. And that really gave me the entry point to really being deeply engaged in the political life of Durham. And what I found over the last 6 months or so is that I think we're reaching a fever pitch downtown with economic development, specifically high-end residential development. And there are a lot of great things about that. That brings a lot of energy, vitality, and money to downtown Durham. But it also has some negative impacts, both inside downtown, but also in the historic neighborhoods that ring our downtown. And we have to make sure, whatever we do in downtown Durham, we have to make sure that Durham remains a city where folks can live and work and raise their kids, no matter how much money they make or what part of the city they live in. And I think that's a theme that every candidate is going to have to address in this campaign, is what they want to do to address that basic issue of affordability for working families in Durham. Because what we absolutely can't become is a city like San Francisco, which is a great town, a lot of great things about it, but working people can't live there. They bus working people in to clean their offices. We can't become that. So much of what Durham is, and especially about Durham, relies on the fact that all different kind of folks live and work and play here. It's critical to our economy, it's critical to our culture, and we just have to make sure whatever we do over the next 5 to 10 years, we preserve that really unique aspect of Durham's character. So.
Yeah, I know that in particular the last couple of weeks we've seen an influx of concentrated crime in certain pockets of Durham. And yesterday, before we came on, I was sourcing questions people, friends, and peers had about, and that was a reoccurring theme, was the crime rate. Not that it was spiking, but that it seemed like it was potentially headed in a direction because of the high development that's going on, that it might start inevitably pushing some of this stuff into more concentrated areas. And so how can we be smart about taking on development as a bigger, with a bigger scope, as opposed to kind of putting all of our energy into downtown and inevitably missing what's happening kind of right on the outskirts of town.
No, I think one of the key things we have to talk about in this campaign and in the city over the next 5 or 10 years is not just economic development downtown, how we do that in a smart way that allows us to keep affordability front and center in our public spaces, but also the fact that we have to do a better job of creating a broadly shared prosperity across Durham. One of the things I love about the development of downtown is that it brings so much outside energy and passion and money into a part of the city that historically had been neglected. But what has tended to happen in recent years is that people who aren't downtown and who maybe can't afford to enjoy a lot of the great stuff that's happening downtown look at what's happening in this part of the city and say, what about my part of the city? What's happening in northeast central Durham? Where are the investment dollars here? And where are our amenities, say, in North Durham? And we have to do a better job as a city, not only of encouraging real estate developers who want to build luxury condos in downtown because they're not going to stop, bring them to the table with us in a partnership to continue to support affordability in other parts of the city, but also make sure that the benefits that flow from that development result in a prosperity that's shared by everybody in Durham. There are a lot of ways to do
it.
There are a lot of ways to do it. I think one of the ways we do it is making sure that when we spend public dollars, we do it in a way that's equitable, that takes into account decades and generations of disinvestment, largely generated by racist policies from Washington and Raleigh through redlining of certain communities and robbing those communities of investment. That's the kind of thing we have to keep front and center when we talk about spreading out public investments in a way that's fair and equitable.
And how do we control that? Because we can sit there and look. Justin lives and goes to school on the Fayetteville Street corridor at Central.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We look at where, the 147 now is blown through the former Hayti, right? And if you were sitting in Mercury Studio in Motorco Complex, if you put a compass or a tape measure out, that's no further to the Hayti Center and where Justin lives than it is to 9th Street and East Campus. But, if we were to roll slowly down there with Josh Hardt's camera past the places we've seen, we've done some walks like that on our sites in the city. It's like night and day, and that's not by choice of the residents, right?
Right.
How does a city council person or a person who just cares about policy take what we can see on the ground and I don't know, do we use the developers' tax dollars or what is it? Like, how do we make those steps that move towards more equitable development? Because I don't want to hear it from my audience that we got away with just saying, well, we ought to.
Yeah, no, I think, the city has a capital expenditures budget. There's
Right.
a plan in place. Those are choices. We choose where to spend public dollars for capital investments. We can choose to spend them in downtown because that has certain benefits that accrue to some kinds of folks, and we hope that there are ancillary benefits that flow to everybody else. Or we can choose to spend those public investment dollars in other parts of the city that have been traditionally disinvested. And it's not rocket science. I'm talking about sidewalks, I'm talking about road widening, I'm talking about bike lanes, I'm talking about what they call safe streets. I'm talking about something as simple as the Parks and Rec budget. Where do we spend Parks and Rec dollars? Why are certain parks in this city much nicer than other parks? I was talking to a sitting city councilman about this 3 weeks ago. He said, there's no reason that should continue to be the case.
Right.
And so these are choices we make. These aren't inevitable consequences or byproducts of a system we have no input into. These are our choices, and the way that city council people, members of the city council, affect that is through our votes about budget, is working on staff to get budgets together that reflect the values we want to see in our public spending. And the way that citizens interact with that is by speaking out at public hearings about the budget, about talking to members of the city council, and through their votes. That's the great thing about elections, is that they clarify policy questions. And so often in Durham, it's a little bit frustrating. As you might know, I'm involved in state politics a little bit as the treasurer of the state party. And what you see is that there are a lot of communities in North Carolina where state legislative races, where governor's races, where U.S. Senate races are hotly contested, like Wake County and Greens and Guilford County are places where those races are hotly contested, where they have real vigorous debates. Durham isn't that place. Durham is pretty homogenous when it comes to those larger, overarching statewide and federal issues. But local races, city council races, county commission races, the race for mayor, these are races where you actually get to have a conversation, in part because they're in off years, and so it's a little bit less political landscape is a little less cluttered. We don't have a lot of the constant air war of ads 24/7, but also because these are the issues that matter to people who live in the city. And so that's what I love about this race and about the local races in Durham, is that they create an opportunity, to create a space where ordinary people can talk about the things that are important to them. You hear, I had someone talk to me about a month ago about a particular resource center, a particular Parks and Rec resource center in a certain part of the city, whether or not that was being utilized effectively. She said, I go down there all the time. I see the staff horsing around. I don't see any kids there. What can we do to revitalize that?
Kitchen table issues is what we call these.
Absolutely.
And I know, Justin, we talk about how we sit around at the coffee shop and have these kind of conversations. I know you've got, a litany of these issues that we run through and talk about. And I think it's great that we can have the opportunity to engage.
And I think the other thing, when you talked about, one of the things that's important is economic development right now. I think Durham does a great job of bringing in high-skill, high-wage jobs that require advanced degrees and multiple years of experience. But in parts of our city where there's deeply entrenched poverty, those jobs aren't a direct benefit to those folks. We need to do a better job, and I think the city has a plan. We just need to make sure we implement it, of having a broader economic development plan that brings in not just those high-skill jobs like, frankly, that our company brings in. Our family business here in Durham employs about 400 folks. And almost all of them are biostatisticians or folks who have training in statistics or running clinical trials. We do have some folks that don't have those layers of experience. So those are the kind of jobs I think we tend to focus on when we talk about economic development. But it's just as important, and in some parts of our city, even more important, to bring in those entry-level jobs and jobs that entry-level folks can transition into to try to climb the ladder of economic success that really will make the biggest impact in places that need economic development.
Durham Tech has been a great, at least in my experience, place where things like that take place. And I don't know how often Durham Tech is, talk about places getting utilized. How often does Durham Tech get utilized as a place where economic development within families can happen? I was a student there. I got my associate's degree from Durham Tech. My mother went through a health information technology program there and now works for the VA hospital. And so, that has been, both her and I have directly benefited from that resource of, trying to get from this level to this level and then this level to this level. So how can we use resources that we already have to help promote that type of internal growth as opposed to trying to bring it in from outside?
Yeah, no, our community college system all across North Carolina is really an engine for economic advancement, much like our public schools. And Durham Tech does a great job doing that. I think one of the greatest things about Durham Tech is that they're really into these partnerships that they create with the City of Durham Workforce Development, Office of Workforce Development, with the state network that does that type of work, the county. There's a program called Made in Durham that the Durham Public Schools are just starting to implement. The superintendent wrote a piece about that about 6 months ago, where he talked about the Made in Durham program. And essentially it's designed to help kids in high school make sure they graduate, make sure they have, by the time they graduate, they have some real work experience through partnerships with private business here in Durham. But also that they go to some kind of post-secondary education and get some kind of certification that they can use to break into some of the more difficult to get into job opportunities. But I think the answer, to answer your question, it's really two things. Number one, we have to make sure that we have enough resources put into those efforts to reach the folks that really need that help. Because your story that you talked about is a great example and needs to be held up as the kind of thing that Durham Tech, the City of Durham, the County of Durham can do more of. But also, we need to make sure that folks know that those opportunities are out there.
Right.
And that's the tricky part. And one of the things that the city is doing a lot better than it has done in the past is going out into the community, like taking a mobile unit that has computers in it where people can go online and do job searches. That's the kind of thing the city's starting to do more of.
Yeah, we did not have that in
exactly.
public school when I was
but
going
you know,
through
And
that's
even
just
if you
starting.
go to the public library right now over on Main Street, you can see their computers are frequently overwhelmed with
Absolutely.
users who just don't have a home computer or don't have internet access. They're not there looking for a library book. They're looking for an online connection. And there is this battle between deploying the resources and having the resources. I don't know what career resource center you were hearing about, but we were over for the police community relations conversation at the Holton Career Resource Center, and one of the commentators afterward just deplored how infrequently the youth in the neighborhood are in that place. And it's a nice place with a
That's
big...
probably Gwen Silver,
Right.
who's the person that I spoke to her.
Right.
And she's been
Crusading for that.
crusading to rejuvenate that particular resource in the community.
And it's a real tricky battle, because I know the city spent good money on that. I mean,
Absolutely.
and it's a nice looking place. And, you know, when we were there were a ton of kids, you know, Latino kids, frankly, outside playing soccer, covering the soccer fields. But there were not many kids inside the building. And I don't have a good answer for how someone gets kids engaged in that way. And I feel like, much as I love Justin, in some ways he's more of an exception than a rule, you know, of what's happened. Like, and we hear over and over again about Durham having a suspension to prison kind of pipeline happening in our schools. And I mean, I'm not expecting you to have a magic bullet.
That's good. I really appreciate that. That's
but
good.
I wonder what we think about that whole trajectory as faced against, you know, our downtown's trajectory of going like this. Why is our public school system just kind of doing a lot of this? And is there hope that it's something different is gonna happen given the changes afoot in town generally?
Well, I think the Made in Durham effort, that public-private partnership, has the opportunity to be transformative for a lot of those kids. And I think the success of something like that depends on public investment, but also private involvement, and making sure that our business leaders, through either the big Chamber of Commerce or also the Alt Chamber of Commerce and those types of organizations, understand there is a way to get engaged with kids in the public schools to help them understand the importance of going through this system and doing the things that I talked about, like getting your diploma or equivalents, about getting work experience, about getting some kind of certification. Those are the things that I think will help transform other families like yours has been transformed. And I think back to my family's experience. We would have loved to have gotten something like that. I mentioned earlier I'm a 10th generation North Carolinian, but my parents were 16 and 17 when I was born. But they went on to graduate from high school. They worked hard to support our family, often working 2 jobs to make ends meet. But my mom got some kind of certification from Forsyth Tech, which is in Winston-Salem, so that she could work in the medical imaging field at Bowman Gray School of Medicine. And that helped us kind of help climb the ladder so that I could go on to become the first person in my family to go to college. But I think that's the kind of story we need more of, and that's the kind of thing that I think our community college system and the kind of public-private partnerships that the city is deeply engaged in right now can do. But we need more energy, we need more focus on them, and we need more direct community involvement from the business community in particular to help kids see that there is a way forward that gives them access to a life of worth and accomplishment, because I think that's really important too.
Justin's on the spear point of some of that with American Underground and the effort to really
American Underground is a big part of it.
reach out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with that organization, and then many of the companies within that incubator space are actively involved in the public school system. I know we did a big crayons to calculators school resource drive within this space. So yeah, I think you're definitely right about the private-public partnership and how can we kind of activate some of those business owners to get more involved. Just speaking from experience, I know on that same Fayetteville corridor, one of the big hindrances for a lot of people, there are certain those walls that go up when you're trying to kind of make the climb from out of poverty. Education is just one small part of that, and so like Aaron said, with my experience maybe being an exception, I grew up in the Watts-Hillendale neighborhood. So, we didn't have nearly the crime problem that a kid in my position might have had in other neighborhoods in town. And so it's not just an education issue, it's not just a crime issue, it's kind of a whole palette of things that we have to address all at once for these types of transformations to happen. And I just wonder about that process. How do we make sure that these different entities, education, crime, business development, aren't working either against each other or
In isolation.
Yeah, right.
Right.
How do we make sure that they're working in conjunction so that these, again, these transformations can take place for kids in the less affluent parts of town?
No, I think one way we do that is make sure that all of these efforts have deep community buy-in. And when you have the same folks from the community involved, not only in the youth outreach for crime prevention, but also economic development aspects and making sure that folks have access to health care through community resources. In many ways, the mayor's poverty reduction initiative shows a way forward in that, because that's a way that you can make sure that all of these different trains of thought and avenues of approach to get at some of these underlying problems are moving along at about the same pace. And what you've seen in that effort is a renewed attempt and really success at getting community activists who are in and of those communities involved in those efforts. And I think that's what it takes. Durham is great because we have so many different organizations and nonprofits, community organizations, who are working on issues that are critically important to our community. And I think just some base level coordination, like what the mayor's office has done with the Poverty Reduction Initiative, can really catalyze that kind of cross-pollination. But because I think the other thing that's great about Durham is that although government and business are really good at creating silos, I think our community organizations have been good at not doing that, at being open to a collaboration and other ideas and involvement. And that's something we've seen in the political activist space. Certainly, when I was on the board of the Durham People's Alliance, when the Fade Coalition came to us to ask us to add our voices to their call for police reforms, what we found is that they were able to bring the whole sort of cornucopia of different community organizations, not only PA, but also the Durham Committee, the NAACP, Southerners on New Ground, Spirit House, they brought the house basically to city council, and we all kind of got behind Fade and said, this is what we need to do. That's the kind of thing we need more of. And I think historically, some of the political activist groups may have been more interested in kind of shooting elbows and trying to get out front and grab the mic and be on the front page of the paper or the news. But what that effort showed us is that we can actually get somewhere if we unite behind one vision. And that was the vision that was coming up very organically from the grassroots, from the communities that were deeply affected by racially disproportionate policies and practices, and say, this diminishes us as a community. We may not live in the neighborhoods where this happens, but it all matters. We're all in community together. Let's go and talk let's meet with the city manager. Let's talk to members of the city council. Let's address them in public hearings. Let's have press conferences where we all talk together about how important this is. That, I think, is the model forward. And that's what was one of the great things about that work we did last summer, is that it wasn't the Durham People's Alliance trying to make change. It was the community coming together as a group of community organizations to try to make a difference in the life of Durham. And our success in that effort, I think, points the way forward in a lot of other areas. If we have the courage to sort of push down our own egos and not worry about who gets the credit, but really talk about
think about the end result.
Think about the end result, exactly. Look at what's best for our neighborhoods, our communities, our kids, making sure that kids see a path forward. Because I think ultimately, that, and not to come all the way around, but that's the reason why you see crime in some of these neighborhoods. It's not because of the breakdown of the family. I absolutely hate that excuse, because there have been single parents, there have been single moms forever, millennia. There's nothing new under the sun. Europe has the same problems, social problems that we do. The only difference is there are a metric ton more of guns in America than there are anywhere else in the world. That's why you have more shootings in America. There's the problem with that is there's very little the city can do from a public policy perspective to change that. The political system at the state and federal level is locked right now. If the massacre of elementary school kids doesn't change anything at Sandy Hook, then we're kind of locked in for a little while. But there are things we can do. There are public policy levers we can use here at the local level that can make a difference. But we have to do that in deep partnership, not only with these types of organizations, but also people that actually live in the communities that are being torn apart right now. You said crime is not necessarily on the rise, but it is. Over the last through the first 6 months of the year, the most violent crime is up about 13.5% over last year. The chief of police talked about that a couple of weeks ago when he gave his report. There are a lot of reasons for that. This actually mirrors a trend all across the country where large cities are seeing a spike in violent crime. A lot of reasons being bandied about for it. But I think here in Durham, one of the things we absolutely have to do if we want to tackle that problem is we have to rebuild the level of trust between our police department and our community. And that's something we started working on last summer. We're going to have to continue to work on it. I went to the police academy graduation last month, and what I heard the leaders of our police department telling the cadets was exactly the message that needs to get out, which is that this is your community too. You have to get out of the car and start walking your beats to make real human connections with people, because that's how people are going to be comfortable coming to the police and talking to them about problems, maybe before someone gets shot or stabbed.
But that's got to be on the police leadership more than the cadets. And
yes,
I know that they were asking Chief Lopez about a residency requirement, or at least a certain amount of residency, because there's some argument that not enough Durham police actually live in Durham. Are those the kind of changes? I mean, I feel like you're fairly involved with the activist community from the list of names we just heard, and I love the psychology of that kind of collaboration. Are you hopeful that the police and that kind of community are going to be able to have those kind of conversations in Durham going forward?
I certainly hope so. I think one of the things we got the city manager to institute last year was making sure that every police officer, every sworn officer goes through racial equity training. That's really, really important to provide officers at every level with the context, historical context, a cultural context for the decisions they have to make every day, often life and death decisions. But also decisions like, do I ask this driver to consent to a search of their vehicle if I don't have any reason to? That was one of the sort of main drivers last summer, was the statistical evidence showed that black drivers were twice as likely to be asked by an officer just in a regular routine traffic stop, can I search your vehicle, than white drivers. And, that's not great. And that's the kind of racial disparity that diminishes us as a community. And what we've seen since we instituted the written consent requirement is what I think many of us had hoped we would see is a little bit more discernment on the part of officers who were in that situation, and a little bit more reliance on actual objective facts, as opposed to just, I'm going to ask this person to search because I can, or because I pulled them over in a certain part of town. The evidence is mixed about what the results of the written consent form actually are. One thing that is clear is that written consent, that officers are asking for consent much less often than they did a year ago. And at the same time that consent searches have gone down, probable cause searches have gone up. And we need to look at why that's happening. It could be happening for good reasons. It could be happening for reasons that are not so good.
Or it could have no correlation at all.
Have no correlation at all, exactly right. So we need to understand what's going on there. I think we need a little bit more data. But what I like about the conversation is that the city council is actually asking these questions now. So Councilman Schewel kind of led the questioning at the last meeting where this topic was discussed. And I like the fact that we're going to be asking for answers, because I think for a long time we didn't do that. Yeah. That's one of the great outgrowths of last summer. But to get directly to your question, I think there is still a considerable amount of frustration in our community about some of the things that the police department does, and some of the ways that the leadership of the police department speaks to the community on certain issues. But what I think we can't lose sight of is the fact that our police officers do an incredibly dangerous and difficult job.
No,
they do it well, and if what I heard at the police graduation last month is any indication, that our young officers are being taught to think about the job the right way. But having said all that, there is still a lot of cultural inertia inside the police department, and I think it's going to take some time. But I think we in the community have to try as hard as we can, despite hearing things that make our blood boil come out of certain of the leadership's mouths. We have to remain focused on the central fact that our communities will only be safe if we have a functioning relationship with the police department. And as hard as that is to do, we have to continue to try. There are lots of other things that we can try to do. I think ultimately The long-term answer is folks don't commit crimes if they have jobs that pay a living wage, if they have access to affordable health care, if they have actual human connections with people that either live in their home or in their community with them. And that is sort of the long-term work of any society, of any city, is to make sure that folks have those connections, have those economic opportunities. We've got some issues in the meantime with the rising crime, particularly violent crime. But I think ultimately if we stay focused on the long-term issues and try to mitigate some of the damage that these sort of decades and generations of disinvestment are causing in our communities and continue to build a relationship of trust with the police department, I think we can get to a place where crime will go down and where these communities will start having a little bit more vibrant economic life to them. So.
And that might just be a great place to leave it, because I think both you and Justin have really nailed on this concept of it's not silos, it's collaboration.
Absolutely.
And it's fantastic to hear that you're already out there working with these activist groups, that you're engaged in these conversations in the community, and we're thrilled to have you on sites in the city, grateful that you came on and gave the public some answers and some time on some of this stuff, and appreciate you answering the questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And
appreciate
just,
it. Yeah, it's great being here.
I just wanted to leave on one thing.
Sure.
We joked with Councilman Eddie Davis about getting on Twitter, and I know that's something that I've definitely seen you engaging on. And just thinking about, Twitter, social media may seem frivolous, on some levels, but at the same time, that communication tool, being able to release that type of information through a place like Twitter, where young people are engaging, where politically active citizens are engaging, is important. And so do you feel like that, do you see that, do you see something like Twitter as just a fun thing to have on your smartphone, or is it something that you feel like is a potential way to further engage the community?
Well, I think the answer is yes. It's a lot of fun. I was involved in Twitter. I first got on Twitter when my first daughter was born, in the midst of screaming babies up in the middle of the night, and you kind of reach out for contact I just got my iPhone, and so we created this kind of network of local young parents who were trying to figure out how to get my baby to stop crying, or how do I deal without having enough sleep. But over time, what Twitter has become is really kind of one of the great digital commons of the 21st century. And I really like the ability to reach out to a bunch of different kinds of people and have instant connections, and to share not only my personal life and how cute my kids are and when they do something really sweet, but also to talk about the issues that are facing our city. I have a friend who's on the county commission in Wake County, John Burns, and John has done a fantastic job of using social media, both Twitter and Facebook, to be very transparent about the decisions that he has to make as a county commissioner, about budgeting decisions, about why he had to make a difficult choice that maybe some activists in the community didn't like or thought it should have been. He should have spent a little more on this, a little less on that. That's the kind of thing I think members of the city council can and should do more of, and that's how I intend to use social media if I'm fortunate enough to serve the city on the city council. It is a tool that can be leveraged in such incredible ways to put the workings of the city council in front of folks who aren't going to sit at home and watch the cable channel devoted to the city council meetings. But you can use it to get out information. There's a big city council meeting coming up on this date. We're going to talk about this. Really want you to turn out and tell us what you think. This is the current budget dilemma we're facing in the city. There are a bunch of, and obviously you can't do this in 140 characters, but you'd link out to something else.
Or 15 seconds Instagram,
maybe, sure, do a video.
Snapchat.
These are the priorities that I'm using to evaluate these budgeting decisions, these capital improvements. These are the kinds of things I want our real estate developers who want to build high-end residential downtown. This is how I want them to partner with us, either downtown or in other parts of the city, to continue to keep our focus on affordability for working families. Those are the kind of messages that you can get out on social media in a way that really engage folks. And I think it's really important, especially in the city council level. There is no more local office than this. It doesn't get any more close to the voters than this. But I think if you can talk about the decisions, not just campaign events and city council meetings, but also talk about why you're doing the things you're doing, the choices you're making, the values that you're reflecting in your votes. I think that is the way to really turn Twitter into something powerful in the lives of folks. So that's how I intend to use it. That's how I've used it now, and that's what we're going to do going forward. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Well, let's make sure people have your Twitter handle.
Sure, it's
after
Charlie Reece, one word, and it's with a C. Charlie Reece with a C, not like the peanut butter cups.
REECE.
That's right, Charlie Reece.
And it is fantastic. We do follow him on Twitter already at the Clarion Content. And I love that you brought that up, Justin, because I do think, that's why we're doing this show, is we hope to engage with the public. We see the failing of the local newspaper not as an indication that people don't care about media. We believe people still deeply care about media.
Yep.
Craigslist just killed their model. They got totally dependent on classified advertising and went away. And we're looking at different ways to be media and different ways to raise money, but there's a crying need for people to have information about this. People deeply care, and the fact that you want to find alternative ways besides just the public access channel, and that's not to say that People's Media is
it's great. Yeah,
they're great,
yeah.
But not everybody is going to sit at home and watch public access TV.
I mean, Twitter is how I found out about Clarion. I mean, that's how I first learned about it. So, it can be a great medium for breaking through and reaching folks who aren't going to do some of the traditional things, like people who don't have a subscription to the Herald Sun, who
will never subscribe to the Herald Sun.
Right.
I mean, our peers are never, ever going to subscribe to the Herald Sun and the NNI. I feel bad for them. I mean, and we like the Indy, but it gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and they let their Durham editor go, and we get in this world where it's like, news is just as important. How do we get it?
Yep. Absolutely.
So we're really grateful that you gave us some YouTube
Thanks
time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. It's great.
To do this
Had a
kind
good
of
time.
stuff. Thank
Awesome.
you so much. It's really terrific.